My rich girlfriend found out my parents were poor, so she decided to break up with me. Now, her father works for me. As a bit of background, my family comes from a very humble background. My dad was a janitor at a school, while my mom cleaned houses to make money. We weren't the poorest, but we definitely weren't middle class either. My family tried everything to make sure I could make something of myself and taught me to work hard for the things I wanted. In high school, I started talking to this girl who was in my class. Let's say her name was Jenny. We were partners in class and quickly started to get along. We began to go out more and more. Every day, I even asked her to go for a walk with me, and we would walk together. I knew Jenny came from a wealthy family and lived practically in a mansion. Her father held a very high executive position at an electric company. Everything was fine until I met her family. Her father asked what my parents did for a living, and I saw their smiles fade. They realized my dad was a janitor and my mom cleaned houses. A few weeks after, Jenny started to become distant and broke up with me through a message. I later found out she had started seeing another boy from my school, who came from a wealthy family, and I was confronted with the reality. Could she really end our relationship just like that? She looked at me with a glance and said she couldn't be with me because she had found someone who was at her social level. My heart was broken. I wanted to cry but held back my tears and just left. Since my parents liked her a lot, I didn't want to tell them we had broken up and that it was because of our financial situation. It would have crushed their pride. Not being good at school, I went to trade school and became an electrician. To get by, I worked like crazy, saving to have income. While everyone was at college, I was working in the real world, staying focused. I used the pain from our breakup to work even harder, and after a few years, I managed to open my own business. However, owning a business started to pose problems after a few months, but my hard work eventually started to pay off. I even began to buy real estate with the money I earned and expand my company. It grew from when I started buying up all the once small competitors. I bought them when they didn't have much value yet. I then bought an electric company from a man who was soon to pass away. He thought I could save his company, and it was the only company still on the table. Buying it would make me the sole player in this field. I would have the monopoly. And it turned out that one of the men behind this company had a very familiar name. It was indeed Jenny's father. You can now check if there's a part 2 by clicking on share and more. My rich girlfriend found out my parents were poor, so she decided to break up with me. Now, her father works for me. Part 2. After purchasing the company, my assistant gave me all the names of the people I would be working with. I saw a first and last name that seemed familiar, one of the company's directors. It was my girlfriend's father. In a few days, I was going to introduce myself as the new director of the company and present all my plans and changes, which also meant dismissing employees who did not meet our standards. The day arrived for me to introduce myself, and I arrived earlier than expected. Wanting to come as a surprise, I dressed casually and blended in with the workers. I was enjoying the food my assistant had provided to everyone in the room when I heard someone behind me. It was Jenny. Oh my God, and that's a moment, she says. I smiled and started to chat a bit with her. She asked me what I was doing here, and as I was about to answer, her father approached and started talking to us. Her father didn't recognize me at first and then recognized me when Jenny mentioned I was her boyfriend from high school. That's when her father started to open up and said, "You're here to clean." After the introduction ceremony was over, I think he assumed I was the janitor. I smiled and told him, "Yes, I work here as a janitor." He started to laugh hysterically and made jokes. He said, "Ah, like your father, huh?" No, he's not my father. It really annoyed me, but I kept my cool. Just as I was about to respond, my assistant took the microphone and started to speak. Everyone looked at her. She then announced my name and asked me to come to the stage. That's when I walked past my girlfriend's father to take the microphone and introduce myself as the new director of the company. You can now check if there's a part 3 by clicking on share and more. My rich girlfriend found out my parents were poor, so she decided to break up with me. Now, her father works for me. Part 3. When I stepped onto the stage, I saw both of them looking into each other's eyes, Jenny and her father. How was this possible? I heard them muttering under their breath, hearing Jenny's father say, "How did this janitor's son make it this far?" I gave a speech and then went over to both of them. I asked if they enjoyed the meal and the ceremony my assistant had prepared. He said he was very surprised to see me get this far and that he was happy for me. I didn't believe a word of it. The worst was Jenny. She started talking to me as if I had always been her best friend. Honestly, she disgusted me. She asked me how I managed to get here, so I told her I had worked hard. She was physically touching me, laughing, and joking, saying she always believed in me. But I knew it was because I had become wealthy, so she disgusted me. My assistant hinted that I had to prepare for my upcoming meeting. So, my car was waiting, and so was my driver. I told them both to enjoy the ceremony my assistant had prepared for them. I left. As I said goodbye, I asked my assistant to gather all the information on Jenny and her father. Apparently, her father had severe financial problems due to his gambling addiction. He was so addicted that they had to sell their house in Florida and one of their cars. As for Jenny, she was now married to the man she left me for. He owned a grocery store in a building, and Jenny was a dental hygienist in a dental office. Time passed, and I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jenny's. She was messaging me to reconnect. She was flirting with me. It deeply disgusted me, but I played along. I agreed to flirt with her, and for weeks and weeks, I recorded the conversation and asked my assistant to compile it into a file. Also, I went to meet my old childhood friend who now owned the building where Jenny's husband had his store. I traded that building in exchange for lands he had his eye on. After months of negotiations, I finally acquired the building. I was then going to send a message to Jenny's husband telling him he could no longer stay here since I owned it. Of course, no one knew who I was, so he would have to leave without knowing it was me. I continued to collect the flirtatious messages I had not sent. I was holding on to my revenge. You can now check if there is a part 4 by clicking on share and more. My rich girlfriend found out my parents were poor, so she decided to break up with me. Now, her father works for me. Part 4. Jenny's father ended up being fired from the company because he spoke ill of me behind my back in front of the directors and executives. It's really not smart to badmouth your boss in front of other people, but it made me a bit sad. I didn't want to fire him because I was told he was a great asset to our company, but I couldn't tolerate that kind of behavior. If you let your employees disrespect you, how can you expect them to see you as a leader? After a few people were fired, they started to sell even more properties, but I was no longer interested in playing a game with this family. I went out and told Jenny's husband that she could no longer keep her grocery store in my building. Then, I sent him an email with screenshots and recordings of my conversation with Jenny. That was a few hours before Jenny started to insult me and spam me with messages saying she thought there was something between us. Then, her husband filed for divorce, and now she has no one but her unemployed father and her home with her mother. Her mother finally found a job at a restaurant to try and help pay off the debts. Jenny's father tried to apply to other electric companies, but they all refused. Thanks to my connections, the best thing I could do was to offer Jenny's father a job as a janitor in my company. I did it as a joke, but in reality, he ended up accepting until he found another job. After years, Jenny's father found another job in another country where Jenny and her mother followed. I don't know what they're doing now, and I'm not curious about it. I've moved on and ended up finding a beautiful and kind woman who gave me 3 wonderful children. Both parents now live in a mansion and they receive money from me every week because they helped me a lot. After all, I wouldn't be here without them.